Welcome, everyone, to Front Row and to this unbelievably compelling topic that we've been discussing when God became white. We talked a good deal about the damage of whiteness, the worldwide catastrophic impact of whiteness in terms of imperialism and militarism and genocides, and in terms of uh, capitalism itself having at its root unlimited acquisition, mainly for white people, entitled white people who feel that God wants white people to have everything. That's it. That's damage enough. But now we're going to go in a more granular way into some of the damage. And I was very taken when I read your wonderful book, Grace,
Oh, thank you.
by the chapter on missiology, a fancy word for the missionary enterprise that I think some of us living in North America can't even uh, begin to gauge the scale of. I remember when I was little, my little Dutch Reformed church in Wisconsin had a women's missionary society. And I know that we had a mission supposedly in Aden, I think, in the Middle East. And then we'd get these little reports back because, but the money kept flowing, right? More or less, no questions asked. Whatever the denomination wanted us to be missionizing, we would missionize. Anyway, so enough from me. Say a little bit about the missionary enterprise and what it's meant in terms of spreading a white gospel around the world, and in many ways a repressive white gospel.
Yeah, so, when I grew up in London and Canada, I met a lot of Presbyterians. I grew up Presbyterian, and so many Presbyterians who saw me said, "Oh, they were missionaries in Korea." And or their grandparents or their uncles. So I met a lot of people like that because Presbyterians and Methodists went to Korea. When I was researching for this book, Um, and always to those missionaries, I said, "Oh, thank you." I didn't know what else to say when everybody kept coming to me and saying that they were missionaries in Korea. When I was researching the book, it was kind of painful for me to read about the missionaries going into Asia. So we know that Christianity didn't grow so much in China or Japan, but it grew a lot in Korea. But what the missionaries wrote about Koreans, so, the chapter that you just mentioned, Missiology of Whiteness, when the missionaries wrote about Koreans, it was not in a positive light, which is so different from the missionary kids or grandkids that I met growing up in Canada, where, oh, they were so positive. So the missionaries basically said that the Koreans were the laziest people that they've ever met. They said they sat around and did nothing all day long but smoked these long pipes. They weren't educated, they were heathens and barbaric. To read those things about my people and my heritage is really painful. And you get this notion of, okay, these Asians are terrible people. So we're going to bring the good news to them. And in the process, share them about Western medicine, Western philosophy, Western theology. Everything white is good. And we will help them get rid of the old evil things, their old religious tradition, their cultural aspects, which are so evil. So, this is the missiology of whiteness, where you want to destroy someone else's thousands of year heritage and culture and religion and saying that this is evil. We are bringing the good news. And in the process, you better get rid of everything of your own. So that was the mentality. And for me, that is so painful. And we know that didn't happen just in Korea. It happened in many places around the world that the white good news is the true good news. And only white people had the understanding of who God is. So, Africans had always been saying that they were always spiritual, that they understood the spirit. They had the spirit. And when the missionaries came, they brought the Bibles and they took all our land. So, these devastating aspects. So, this missiology is so tied in with colonialism, with genocide, and with war. And I wish that this was more commonly taught in our churches or in our history books, but it's not, because history is usually written by the winners or those who are powerful. So they're always going to say that, the East, the people from the East are uneducated and inferior human beings. And I think, we have so many scholars now and post-colonial scholars like Edward Said, who in his book Orientalism really lays out how the West orientalized the East and made us like into these infantile, kind of feminine people. And if you live under dualism, we know that, feminine is weaker than the masculine, male is better than the woman, body is worse than the soul. So we have that dualistic view. So I think understanding the damage of this missiology of whiteness worldwide in Asia, Africa, and South America is going to be a really hard thing for white Europeans to swallow, but we need to talk about it. So I felt the need to kind of talk about it in the book. I wasn't planning to write so much about Asia, but when I stumbled on all these literature left by the missionaries, it was one of the most painful moments for me. The attack on my people was not easy for me to read through.
Well, and it's having seismic effects now
Mm.
in a boomeranging way inside U.S. Christianity, in that the Pentecostal people in particular, who were very effective in Central and South America, the people emigrating to the United States who have a fairly hard right view of things are of course the Christians. If you look at the Latinx vote for Trump, among that very significant sector this time was a whole bunch of people, and they're organized and they're still subsidized by rich white conservative Christian bodies, right? It serves their interest, to go back to something we said in episode 2.
Yes.
And then you have you mentioned this, but the sword and the Bible going together. Uh, in Central America, certainly the CIA set up puppet regimes, like in Guatemala, Rios Montt, who was a born again Christian, to do the bidding of the United States. So the business of extraction and control and an expanded military footprint goes along with this so-called Christian imprint. Uh, I I puzzle, maybe you puzzle, on why it is that the reactionary white Christianity seems to have so much more juice now than progressive Christianity. And I'm thinking in particular the ability of the Christian right in the United States to punch through the so-called wall of separation between church and state all over the place in a majority of U.S. states in terms of subsidies for Christian schooling. That's about to become law nationally with the case that the Supreme Court has taken, an Oklahoma case. I shudder to think about what remains of public schooling, what remains of what we used to call universal, non-sectarian education, when the people, believe me, the people who are going to get those tax dollars for their schools, are not liberal Episcopalians or my denomination, the United Church of Christ. I mean, they're going to be schools of indoctrination. They're going to be like, we complain about the madrasas, right? In Muslim countries. Well, they're going to be Christian madrasas. Am I wrong? Am I
Well,
going off the deep end? I often do.
I think you're right. And I don't understand why the right is so much bigger or more powerful than the more liberal and progressive. I try to make sense of it in my own research and my own writing. And I think it's this appeal where I remember growing up in a very conservative church too, where you kind of leave your reasoning behind and you come with your faith. So you don't need your brains when you come to church. You just come to worship and just listen to whatever the pastor's saying. There's a good side, but then the negative side is you can be taught wrong doctrines or wrong theology, which then has huge consequences. So I think leaving the brain behind when you enter the church, no, you bring your brain, you bring everything that you have to come to understand the faith that you are believing in. And you need to be able to make sense of it, making faith understanding. You gotta be able to use your reason, everything that God has given you to make sense. But people just become a little lazy or they just don't feel the need to. And so when you're heavily indoctrinated by like one side and you just follow blindly, then we have what is happening right now. So I think, my book is opening kind of new ways of thinking, with this particular topic of missiology of whiteness. And, as an immigrant child, I must share that um, I was, because I was made fun of at school and wherever I went, many of us immigrants. So in the 70s, a lot of the Koreans came. In the 80s and 90s, to the city that I was living in, it was a lot of Vietnamese, and we call them the boat people. They were leaving the war, they were fleeing the war, and they came. So we had these different immigrants. And when white kids make fun of you, um, you know, I wrote blogs on this, the westernization of beauty. You want to hide your identity. Like, I don't want to speak Korean outside. So if my parents spoke to me in Korean, I just wanted to just run away. Like, that was one of the big crimes that my parents could commit against me. Why are you speaking in a foreign language when everybody's making fun of me anyway? So, and this westernization of beauty, girls growing up, making their eyes look different with the eyelid. And, when we think about Korea, the westernization of beauty, when the missionaries came, that, we were so ugly. Korea now is like number one country for facial reconstruction. I think Brazil is number one for body reconstruction. But what they are doing, what the Koreans are doing is they want to look more white. So there's like whitening things that you can do to your skin, the enlarge, like putting the double eyelids like Western women, making their noses bigger like white people. And some of them are getting there because we Asians, I don't have a typical face. It's more of a square face. So the chiseling of the jawline. So this westernization and this missiology of whiteness that has been placed in Asia, and then it continues on here in North America. So I remember, like, I just wanted to look like the rest of the white girls, and you would do things to try to fit in and being so shameful of your own culture and your own identity. And in that kind of phase, you just want to go to church and then listen to the white pastor who's preaching and just accept everything. But, it took me a long time to be more critical and be more analytical because these are the gifts that God has given everybody. We can't just sit in the pews and just take it. We need to be able to make sense of it for our lives. And if a white male preacher, a straight white male preacher teaches only one version of Christianity, which excludes a whole bunch of other people, like the women and the queer and the people of color and, different identities, then this is a problem. Jesus loved everyone. When we think about the time of Jesus and, you know, the Jewish people didn't get along with the Samaritans. They were kind of these little enemies against each other. And so Jesus teaches about the Good Samaritan. And then he is there in the middle of the day at a well speaking with a Samaritan woman. Now, that is an unbelievable scene when you break it down. But that is what Jesus did. He broke down barriers. He talked to women, which is unusual. And then to a Samaritan, which is doubly unusual. And in the middle of the day when, nobody came to the well, and that's when like a woman with 5 husbands would come. Jesus did that. He touched and was with the lepers, with the most marginalized people. If that's not the gospel message that the church and the ministers preaching, then maybe you need to find another place. If the minister is preaching messages of hate and building walls and marginalizing certain groups of people, that is not the gospel message that Jesus gave. So we need to be critical and we need different voices at the table. That's kind of how the book ends too, opening up our eyes, because if we are just these finite human beings and God is infinite, like, I need everybody at the table to tell me who God is. I can't just say my way is the only way, because that is just like this minute way of viewing God. So I'm hoping that people will be challenged and challenge whoever is preaching or speaking and make faith make sense for themselves.
Yeah. Again, I think surveys have been done of what is actually preached in Christian pulpits in the United States, and the Good Samaritan, the woman at the well, a lot of Jesus doesn't get preached. A lot of Romans gets preached. A lot of again, to use your earlier reference to dualism, mind, spirit, good, body, flesh, sin. I have to say, growing up in a conservative church where I used to joke with my friends, I'd say it wasn't just queer sexuality that was not spoken of in a rural Dutch Reformed community. Any sexuality is not spoken of. And I grew up on a farm where
That's
all
true.
the animals are having a good time, but that's okay. But we don't do that, right?
They never
Uh,
talked about it until they wanted to isolate people. Then you start
right.
talking about it.
Right. So actually, my parents were unable to talk about sex at all. I got a pamphlet once about that was left on my bed about masturbation. It took me a while to figure out what it was about because it was in Christian language, right? Uh, but I have to say, because our preachers were in their time and place were intellectuals, right? I mean, they preached these incredibly long and Bible filled sermons, I was convinced that the Pauline sense of the world, nous, reason, logos, is against what sarx, flesh, that was it. And when I was an adolescent and having sexual stirrings, I'm like, oh, I'm done for. I am so cooked. So, your sexual anxiety and guilt causes you to make a confession of faith. I'm worthless. I'm completely worthless. But Jesus, through his precious blood, has accepted me, right? Has accepted me on condition, that I behave in a certain way. It locks you down. It locks you down. I can't say that I'm oppressed the way trans people, for example, right now are fearing for their lives. But again, this is why this public subsidy of Christian schooling just terrifies me, because they're going to be telling these kids, no, two genders, the twain cannot be mixed. There's no fluidity in sexuality.
Yeah.
They're coming at it with a systematic approach and people, and there will be suicides. There will be people who take their lives on account of this cruelty.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. So this is something that we need to be aware of. And what kind of gospel message are we sharing with one another? And the book is called When God Became White. And I think how we understand God and view God has huge impact on our whole Christianity, our whole identity as Christians, and our ethics, how we act every day. So yeah, I think our image, I didn't know whether you wanted to get into that today, but our understanding of who God is really does impact us. So I think the language and the imagery, the metaphors, we need to be very, very careful. And thus far in Christianity for the last 2000 years, it has been white and straight and masculine. Yeah.
Yeah, and always militant, always
Yes.
militant,
Well, it was a kingly.
always willing to throw the first stone.
Yeah.
Before we leave this episode in terms of damage, uh, I wonder if we could reflect for just a minute about the ease with which white Christians can do no wrong. The what I call sometimes cheap grace. Uh, uh,
Yeah.
and this again comes from this idea that salvation is purely vertical for me and God. So it's okay that I was a slave trader for 30 years because I wrote a really good hymn when I changed my mind. Right? That's John Newton and Amazing Grace. Um, I don't mean to make that a light thing, but I find I'm working in Rhode Island with a congregation of people I love, Unitarians, who think because we're Unitarians, we had to be on the right side of history forever. And it's come as a bit of a shock for them to realize that the church, at the point they became Unitarian, was becoming very reactionary in terms of its relationship to Black people here in Rhode Island and exercising its considerable power in the wrong direction. Uh, Really, these are highly educated people, many with PhDs, and like, that can't be right. We had to be abolitionists. Did we rescue this one guy from the slave catchers? Well, it turns out that guy freed himself and worked for the church for years, but they never even learned his name. They called him Black Dan, right? They didn't even bother to learn his full name. But whiteness is a kind of bubble and an invisible shield. And
Yeah.
explain why that's a bit of a problem. You have a wonderful bit in the book about reconciliation, how people seek reconciliation, which is different from justice. Maybe speak about that.
Yeah, so I think when white people can do no wrong, it's all tied in with whiteness. And there was a feminist theologian, Mary Daly, who taught in Boston, and she said, if God is male, then the male is God. So I would say if God is white male, then the white male is God. So, the Catholic Church, they continue to say that women can't be ordained because men are closer to God. So it's this closeness or this closer approximate proximity to God that then says you are better than other people. So white people are closer to God because we believe in a white God. So of course, white people are better. And if you are not white, then the Black people are the most unlike white people. We'll put them away at the bottom. So they're at the bottom of the hierarchy. So this is a very dangerous narrative, but it continues to be used. And that's why we allow white supremacy to exist. People keep saying, oh, no, that's just something that happened in the past. No, it's still here that allows this white people to kind of rule over us because white people are better than us, can do no wrong, they're smarter, so they will teach us how we are to think about God, how we are to sing about God, and how we are to live our lives. So this is all intersecting, all intertwining with each other. That's why the power of whiteness is real, which allows white people to do things and they get away with it. The enslavement of Africans, that is a horrible thing. But, you know, none of them were jailed. None that I can think of. They didn't go to jail for whole having slaves. They actually thought it was God ordained, that God allowed, this is all ordained by God. So, this is huge consequences of having a white male God, which continues to say white people are closer to God and therefore can represent God. I felt this even when I was in seminary in the 1990s, and I felt it through my PhD program, that white theologians are really brilliant. And so whatever I was trying to do was so dumb. I felt it in the classes I had to take as I was writing my thesis, that anything tied to non-white way of philosophy or theology is garbage. So it took me a long time to overcome that. And so, I bring in some Asian culture or Asian words or Korean words and concepts into theology. And, when I give some talks, people will say, well, that sounds a little syncretistic. And I'm thinking, well, the white Christianity that you gave us is very syncretistic. So you did it the whole 2000 years. You brought in pagan practices, pagan ways of thinking about God into Christianity, and nobody challenged it. Nobody thinks it's bad. Nobody wants to even remember it. Every time we celebrate Easter, nobody's going to talk about the pagan heritage and the history behind Easter. They don't want to deal with it. But if a Black person like James Cone talks about a Black God and talking about African concepts, then what they are doing is bad. And what I am doing is unacceptable because it's syncretistic. That is all whiteness being played out. And we need all these voices. We need women's voices. We need Hispanic people's voices, Native American spirituality, all of these things to help us. So we have a long way to go to get away from this notion of white people cannot do no harm or nothing bad. They just ask for forgiveness and everything is forgiven and they are all good. So even in the book and in my previous books, like Embracing the Other and in my other book, Invisible, I talk about the Korean concept of Han. So Han, spelled H-A-N, is talking about the sin against or the horizontal sin, the pain that we experience because of these systemic injustices that are placed in our society. For example, patriarchy is one system that goes against all women. It subordinates us. It makes us second-class citizens. It allows harm to happen, rape to happen without much consequence, and any assault, verbal, physical, sexual assault to happen. This is patriarchy, and therefore it causes harm. So I think, Peter, you mentioned Puritans. I think for a long time, well, I think all of Christianity, we had a very vertical perspective of sin. So, okay, I sinned against God, so I will ask for forgiveness and I am all okay. So slavery, you're okay because you said, oh, that was so bad. Oh, we'll just free them and we're all okay. No, none of us will go to jail. But it was a crime against humanity. Or genocide, the whole manifest destiny, the doctrine of discovery, killing people. These were Christians, and the Pope allowed it. They said, go ahead and do it. no repercussions. Nobody was jailed for murder. Nobody had to pay any consequences to this. They just got rich. They took all the land and became so rich. So this vertical relationship we need to question. So this Asian concept of Han is really looking at the horizontal relationship. And, in the different parts of the world, Ubuntu theology, the African theologians talk about Ubuntu. I am because we are. So the community is important. So Han is looking at the other side of sin, the sin that we are committing against human beings. So the sin of enslavement, which happened for too long, not just on American soil, but in so many other European countries and other places around the world, that causes harm. So we really need to work on this and seek forgiveness from our brothers and sisters and work on the horizontal relationships. I think Christianity, this vertical, of course that's important, but the horizontal one has been neglected. And so really working for justice. And if we're not going to work for justice, then I don't know what love is, because love is about justice and trying to break down these social injustices of patriarchy, of colonialism, genocide, enslavement. And when we think about enslavement, we think it's gone, but human trafficking is still happening around the world, where young boys and girls and women are being sold as sexual slaves around the world and as other workers in factories around the world. So a lot of these injustices are still happening. So if we are people of faith, we need to do something about it. And I would just tie it back to, if we continue to have this white male image of God, it's going to continue to allow this to happen. So that's a lot of things for us to work on.
We'll leave it there for now, and we are going to go in greater depth, actually, into the theological and biblical world next time. So please join us for episode 4, Theologies of Terror and Torment. Until next time.